She leaned close and whispered words I'll never forget. And just like that, my world changed. It was one of those ordinary afternoons that felt like nothing could ever be extraordinary, yet somehow, everything shifted the moment I saw her. The cafe was quiet, sunlight spilling through the tall windows, dust motes dancing lazily in the air. I had just grabbed a table near the corner, my laptop open, but my attention somewhere far away. That's when she appeared, moving with a grace that seemed almost deliberate, though effortlessly natural. She was older than me, yes, but not in a way that drew attention to the difference. It was subtle, the quiet confidence in the tilt of her shoulders, the way her hair fell with casual elegance around her face, the hint of life experience in her eyes. I noticed her first not because she demanded it, but because she existed in a way that made the room quieter somehow, or maybe it was just my perception. She reached for a book on a nearby shelf, and our hands brushed. Just for a moment, light and fleeting, yet it sent an unexpected pulse through me. I felt her warmth through the thin fabric of her sleeve, the softness of her fingers as they passed mine, and for a second I became acutely aware of my own heartbeat. I couldn't tell if it was excitement, curiosity, or something else entirely. Her eyes, a shade that reminded me of rain-washed streets, met mine briefly. There was no overt recognition, no dramatic spark of love at first sight, just a subtle, almost imperceptible acknowledgement. And yet, it lingered longer in my mind than any grand gesture ever could. She smiled, a faint, knowing smile, as if she sensed my attention without needing words to confirm it. I wanted to say something, anything, but my words caught in my throat. Instead, I watched her move to the counter, the soft swish of her coat brushing against her back. I noticed the way sunlight glinted off the edge of her hair, the faint perfume that left a gentle trace in the air behind her. Every detail registered in a way that felt almost overwhelming, as if the world had shifted to make room for her presence alone. There was something quietly vulnerable about her, too. Maybe it was the slight hesitation when she chose a seat, the way she traced the rim of her coffee cup with her finger, or the occasional furrow of her brow as she read. It made her human, approachable, yet infinitely intriguing at the same time. I found myself wanting to know her, not just the surface, but the layers beneath that quiet exterior. By the time I finally dared to glance away, she had settled into her seat, completely absorbed in her book. But the memory of her lingered, like a note in a song you can't forget. I realized then that this encounter, however ordinary in action, had planted a seed of curiosity, of something unspoken and undefined, a quiet tension that promised more than the ordinary. And deep down, I knew I would remember this moment, the brush of her hand, the warmth of her presence, and the way she quietly commanded the corner of that cafe, long after she had left. A few days after our first encounter, I ran into her again in the most ordinary of places, a quiet bookstore tucked away on a side street. It wasn't planned, though part of me wondered if the universe had a sense of humor. She was there, standing in the aisle where poetry met philosophy, her fingers gently tracing the spines of books, as if she could feel their stories before opening them. This time, there was no accidental brush of hands, at least not at first, but there was something in the way she looked up and caught my gaze that made my chest tighten. She smiled, a small, almost private acknowledgement, and I felt my lips curve without realizing it. I wanted to say something clever, something that would make her laugh, but words faltered the moment I opened my mouth. "Hey," I managed, my voice slightly rougher than it. She talked about the books she loved with a passion that was understated, almost conversational, yet revealed glimpses of the woman beneath the poised exterior. I listened, fascinated, not just by the words, but by the subtle rhythm of her gestures, the way her hair fell across her shoulder when she tilted her head, the soft brush of her sleeve against mine as we moved closer to examine a shelf. There was an unspoken understanding between us, a sense that neither of us needed to fill every silence. We shared smiles, small nods, and the occasional laugh, simple yet profound in their quiet intimacy. Sitting on a small bench by the window to rest, I noticed her subtly leaning toward me, as if drawn by proximity rather than thought. The warmth radiating from her shoulder when it brushed mine was gentle but unmistakable, sending a shiver down my spine that had nothing to do with the cool autumn air outside. As she left the bookstore, we exchanged one of those fleeting, lingering looks that carried more than words ever could. I watched her go, feeling a strange mix of longing and anticipation. Something was starting, slow, quiet, and inevitable. That accidental closeness, those small, respectful touches, the effortless intimacy, it was enough to pull me in deeper, planting a seed of desire I couldn't yet name. By the time I left the store, the image of her, the curve of her smile, the soft sway of her movements, and the warmth of her fleeting touches was etched into my mind. I realized then that ordinary moments had begun to take on extraordinary meaning, and that I would remember this day long after the pages of those books were forgotten. It was one of those quiet evenings that seemed ordinary at first, but I already knew, deep down, that ordinary was about to feel impossible. We had met by chance again, this time walking together along a narrow, tree-lined street after grabbing coffee. The world was hushed, leaves rustling softly in the breeze, distant footsteps echoing lightly, and the muted hum of the city in the background. We walked side by side, but there was a new awareness in the air. I found myself matching her pace, subtly adjusting my steps to be near her, to share the same space, to feel the warmth radiating from her presence. Every so often, our arms brushed, brief contact that sent an almost electric tingle through me. And yet, it was natural, unforced, almost accidental. At one point, she stopped to adjust the scarf around her neck. As she leaned toward me, her shoulder brushed against mine, and I could feel the soft warmth through the fabric. She looked up at me with those quiet, knowing eyes, and I realized she had noticed my subtle hesitation, my awareness of every brush of skin and every faint scent of her perfume mingling with the crisp evening air. Then she whispered, just a few words, so low and intimate that the sound of her voice seemed to wrap around me, pressing gently against my ear. Her breath was warm, brushing the shell of my ear in a way that sent shivers down my spine. I didn't immediately process what she said. Her words lingered in fragments, delicate yet charged, embedding themselves deep in my consciousness. They were personal, soft, and impossible to ignore, like a secret shared only between us. Her proximity was intoxicating. I felt the slight shift of her body as she leaned closer, the subtle weight of her hand brushing mine as she adjusted her scarf, and the rhythm of her heartbeat, faintly perceptible in the way she moved. Every instinct screamed that I should step back, that this closeness was dangerous in its intensity, but I couldn't. I didn't want to. The world around us seemed to blur. The streetlights, the distant sounds, even the chill in the air, all faded into insignificance. My focus narrowed entirely on her. The warmth of her body near mine, the delicate lilt of her voice, and the lingering echo of her whispered words. I replayed them in my mind as we continued walking, over and over, analyzing the softness in her tone, the slight curve of her lips as she spoke, the way her eyes flicked toward mine, searching for reaction. When she finally straightened and took a small step back, the spell of that moment didn't break. It hovered, suspended in the space between us. My chest still ached from the proximity, my mind replaying the whisper like a song I couldn't forget. Something had shifted, subtly yet irrevocably. I was no longer merely observing her from afar. I was entwined in the gravity of her presence, caught in the orbit of something I didn't yet fully understand. And as we parted that evening, I realized that her words, soft and fleeting though they were, had etched themselves into my memory. They lingered like a quiet echo, a secret tether drawing me closer, compelling me to want to know her in ways I couldn't yet define. The whisper wasn't just sound, it was a spark, and I knew instinctively that the fire it ignited would shape everything that came next. A few evenings later, we found ourselves sitting on a quiet bench in the park, the city lights casting soft reflections on the nearby river. The air was cool, tinged with the faint scent of blooming flowers, and the distant hum of traffic felt like a gentle rhythm beneath the quiet of the night. It was the kind of space that invited honesty, the kind of stillness that made words, when finally spoken, land with weight. She looked different that night, less guarded, more human. There was a softness around her eyes, a vulnerability she hadn't allowed me to see before. I noticed it in the way she absently traced the edge of the bench with her fingers, the way her shoulders slumped just slightly, carrying an invisible weight. I had known her as confident, composed, almost untouchable, but this was real, raw, and infinitely compelling. "I've had my share of complicated moments," she said softly, her voice low, almost hesitant, as if testing the waters. I stayed silent, letting her words find their space between us. She shifted slightly closer, not demanding, just leaning subtly against the side of my arm. The warmth of her body radiated through the thin fabric of her coat, grounding me in the moment. Her hands, delicate and expressive, played with the zipper of her bag as she continued. "Sometimes, I wonder if people see me as I truly am, or just the version I present to the world." There was a tremor in her tone, not fear, exactly, but a quiet vulnerability that made my chest tighten. I felt an almost magnetic pull, the desire to bridge that distance, to let her know that I wanted to see her, really see her. Without thinking, I reached out, resting my hand lightly over hers. The contact was brief, gentle, yet the electricity it carried was unmistakable. Her fingers lingered for a heartbeat, her warmth seeping into me, and I felt her trust in a quiet, unspoken way. The simple gesture, the shared touch, spoke louder than any words could. "I've learned to guard myself," she admitted, eyes glimmering in the soft light. "It's not easy to let someone in, to let them see all the cracks." Her gaze met mine, unwavering, and I saw the fragility beneath the elegance, the humanity behind the composed exterior. I realized in that instant that this was more than attraction. It was connection, subtle and profound, born from honesty and trust. We sat together in silence for a while, the kind of silence that doesn't feel empty but full, resonant with unspoken understanding. I could feel the warmth of her shoulder against mine, the faint rhythm of her breathing, the way her hand relaxed in mine without force or expectation. The vulnerability she shared didn't make her weaker. It made her radiant, approachable, and achingly real. As the night drew on and we eventually parted ways, I carried more than the memory of her whispered words from before. I carried her openness, her humanity, and the quiet, lingering intimacy that only comes when someone lets you into their inner world. It was a delicate, slow-blooming realization. The heart of attraction is not just desire. It is trust, and she had given me the first thread of it. The days that followed were quiet, ordinary in appearance, but charged with a subtle energy I couldn't ignore. We began running into each other more often, sometimes by chance, sometimes it seemed almost intentional. Every encounter, every shared moment, was a thread weaving us closer together, pulling me deeper into a connection I hadn't expected but couldn't resist. It started with small, almost imperceptible gestures. Walking through a crowded market, our shoulders brushed as we reached for the same bag of apples. The touch was fleeting, yet I felt the warmth linger in my chest long after. Sitting across from her at a small cafe, our knees occasionally touched beneath the table, sending a subtle ripple of tension that neither of us acknowledged aloud, yet both of us felt acutely. We began to share quiet walks in the evenings. The city seemed to slow down for us, the hum of cars and chatter fading into the background. I noticed the way she leaned slightly toward me when she laughed, her hair brushing my shoulder. I caught myself unconsciously adjusting my pace so our steps matched, so I could feel the warmth radiating from her body just a little longer. It wasn't romantic in the obvious sense, but the intimacy of proximity made my heart ache in ways I had never experienced. There were moments of gentle care, too. She would adjust my scarf when the wind picked up, her fingers lingering for just a moment too long. I found myself doing the same, brushing her hair from her face when it fell in her eyes, the touch so casual yet loaded with unspoken meaning. These moments were fleeting, often passing unnoticed by anyone else, but for us, they resonated like quiet confessions. The tension between us grew in these silences. Sitting on a park bench, watching the sunset spill golden light across the horizon, our hands would occasionally meet. No words were needed, just the warmth of skin against skin, the subtle pressure of a thumb brushing another, the way our bodies leaned slightly toward each other. It was a language all its own, unspoken and yet profoundly understood. Even simple shared experiences carried weight. Sharing a book, sipping coffee in companionable silence, laughing over a trivial joke, they all became milestones, tiny sparks in a slow-burning fire. Each glance she cast my way, lingering just a moment longer than necessary. Every subtle smile, every gentle tilt of her head, created a rhythm I couldn't stop following. By the end of these lingering moments, I realized something undeniable. Our connection wasn't built on grand gestures or dramatic declarations. It was in the quiet touches, the shared laughter, the subtle proximity, and the awareness of each other that filled the spaces between us. These ordinary, unremarkable moments had transformed into something extraordinary, something tender, intimate, and impossible to ignore. As I walked home that evening, replaying our shared moments in my mind, I understood that desire had matured into something deeper, an unspoken bond, an emotional gravity, a quiet intimacy that neither of us was ready to name aloud, but both of us felt with every glance, every brush of hands, every lingering presence. The slow burn was no longer a whisper, it was a current pulling us steadily toward each other, and I knew it would only intensify with time. It was a rainy evening when it finally happened. The sky was heavy with clouds, and the soft drumming of raindrops against the cafe windows created a rhythm that matched the tension in my chest. We had sought refuge inside, a small, quiet corner by the window, the warm glow of the lamps casting soft shadows across her face. I could feel the weight of the moment pressing down, as if the universe had conspired to give me the courage I needed. Her presence beside me was comforting and intoxicating all at once. The warmth of her shoulder brushing mine, the subtle scent of her perfume mingling with the aroma of coffee, and the soft, rhythmic sound of her breathing. All of it grounded me, yet made my heart race. I had spent so long replaying whispered words, lingering touches, and quiet smiles in my mind, but now the reality of speaking felt terrifyingly real. I need to tell you something. I began, my voice uneven, betraying my calm exterior. She tilted her head slightly, those quiet, knowing eyes meeting mine, patient but curious. The small brush of her hand against mine sent a spark through me, and I realized how desperately I wanted her to understand. Not just my words, but the emotion behind them. I don't know how to say it, or even if I should. I continued, my fingers tightening slightly around hers. But I feel something for you, something I can't ignore. Her breath caught, subtle, almost imperceptible, and for a moment, the cafe seemed to shrink around us. I noticed the slight tremor in her fingers as she rested them on the table, the soft parting of her lips, and the depth of her gaze, which was both warm and guarded. The hesitation in her eyes mirrored the hesitation in my own heart, and I realized just how much she had been holding back. She leaned slightly closer, not closing the distance completely, but enough to make the warmth of her presence undeniable. I feel it too, she admitted softly, her voice barely above a whisper. But you have to understand, it's complicated. There are expectations, perceptions, things I can't just ignore. Her fingers brushed mine again, light and tentative, as if testing the waters of honesty and trust. The vulnerability in her words struck me more than any previous gesture. I saw the strength behind the caution, the quiet courage it took for her to admit her feelings despite fear of judgment. And in that moment, I understood this was not just attraction or infatuation. It was a connection forged from trust, care, and the willingness to face uncertainty together. We sat there, hands occasionally brushing, shoulders close, neither of us willing to let go, yet both aware of the delicate balance between desire and hesitation. The rain outside mirrored our emotions, steady, persistent, and full of possibility. The confession had opened a door, yet walking through it required courage, patience, and a deep understanding of the bond we were building. By the time the rain eased and we stepped outside, the city lights reflected on the wet pavement, and I felt a quiet exhilaration. Hesitation remained, yes, but so did a promise, a subtle, unspoken acknowledgement that we were moving toward something real, something worth navigating, even if it meant facing the world and its judgments together. The following weeks unfolded gently, like a sunrise brushing the world with soft light. Our connection, once a flicker of curiosity and whispered tension, had grown into something steady, warm, and quietly undeniable. We began to move through ordinary moments with an extraordinary awareness of each other, the kind that makes every glance, every touch, feel significant. One Sunday morning, we met at a small riverside cafe, the smell of freshly baked bread and coffee hanging in the air. The city around us was alive but softened by the early light, and for the first time, I felt entirely at ease in her presence. Not because the tension had disappeared, but because it had settled into something comfortable and enduring. She smiled at me, that familiar quiet smile, and I realized I no longer had to chase her attention. She was here, fully present, just as I was. We shared breakfast, our hands occasionally brushing across the table. Each touch was deliberate and tender, a thumb brushing hers, the light press of her palm against mine as we reached for sugar, the warmth of her fingers lingering slightly longer than necessary. It was intimacy without urgency, affection without expectation. I found myself memorizing these small moments, knowing they were building the foundation of something lasting. Later, we walked along the riverbank, the sunlight dancing on the water surface. She leaned into me slightly as we navigated a narrow path, and I felt the gentle press of her shoulder against mine. The warmth of her body was comforting, familiar, a quiet reassurance that we were moving forward together, unhurried, aware of every step and every heartbeat. I caught her hand in mine, our fingers interlacing naturally, and the simple connection carried more weight than any grand declaration could. There were shared smiles and laughter, quiet conversations punctuated by thoughtful pauses, and the comfort of knowing someone sees you for exactly who you are. I noticed her vulnerability lingering just beneath the surface, now met with my understanding and care rather than hesitation or fear. She laughed freely, a sound that resonated through me, and I realized how rare it was to feel this kind of complete ease with another person. As the day faded into evening, we sat on a bench, watching the sun dip below the horizon. Her head rested lightly against my shoulder, her hair brushing softly against my neck, and I felt a sense of completeness I hadn't known I was seeking. The whispered words from the past weeks, soft, electric, intimate, had transformed into a quiet, steady love. They no longer haunted me. They comforted me, a reminder of the journey we had taken together. Walking home, our hands still intertwined, I understood that the story wasn't about fleeting passion or dramatic gestures. It was about trust, patience, and the gentle weaving of two lives together. Every brush of skin, every shared smile, every lingering touch was a testament to the bond we had cultivated. And in that slow, deliberate unfolding, I realized the world could still be ordinary, but with her, every moment felt extraordinary. The whispered words that had first drawn me and were now part of a living, breathing intimacy, a connection that would echo softly, warmly, and unforgettably for the rest of my life.